It's funny how you can look back at a photograph of a life you once had and not even recognize the person smiling back at you. I have a picture like that on my old laptop. It's of me, my husband Mark, and our 2 kids, Liam and Sophie, taken on our deck one perfect summer evening. The sun is setting, casting this golden, almost holy light over everything. Mark has his arm around me, a solid, comforting weight I had come to rely on more than my own heartbeat. The kids are a mess of giggles and grass stains, and I'm looking at the camera with this expression of pure, unadulterated contentment. It was a genuine smile, I know it was. That's the most heartbreaking part. I remember the feeling of that moment, the smell of Mark's cologne, the warmth of his hand, the sound of our children's laughter. It was everything I had ever worked for, everything I had ever wanted. Our life was a carefully constructed masterpiece of modern success. We had the sprawling suburban house with the perfectly manicured lawn and the 2-car garage. I was a senior architect at a prestigious firm downtown, a job I adored, a job that demanded long hours and a significant portion of my soul, but one that filled me with a sense of purpose. Mark was in finance, a steady, reliable provider who seemed to worship the ground I walked on. He was the good husband, the one who remembered anniversaries, who told me I was beautiful when I felt exhausted and worn down, who always championed my career, even when it meant he had to handle dinner and bath time alone. We were a team. That's what we told everyone. That's what I believed with every fiber of my being. But a masterpiece requires constant upkeep. Behind the golden sunsets and the family portraits, there was the relentless churn of logistics. School runs, client deadlines, parent-teacher conferences, grocery lists, laundry piles that seemed to regenerate overnight. I was the conductor of this chaotic symphony, and the baton was getting heavy. The promotion I had been working towards for 3 years was finally within my grasp, but it came with a project that was less of a job and more of a siege. I was stretched thin, a rubber band pulled to its absolute breaking point. I was snapping at the kids, falling asleep at my drafting table, and the easy intimacy Mark and I shared was being replaced by exhausted sighs and scheduling conflicts. It was Mark, of course, who suggested it. "We need help, babe," he said one night, finding me slumped over my laptop at 2 a.m. "You can't do it all. We should get a nanny, a live-out, just to help with the kids after school and give you some breathing room." It felt like a surrender at first, an admission that I couldn't handle my own life. But looking into his concerned eyes, all I saw was love. He wasn't criticizing me, he was trying to save me. The idea took root, and the more we talked about it, the more it sounded not like a surrender, but a solution, a lifeline. We spent 2 weeks interviewing a series of perfectly adequate, perfectly forgettable candidates. There was the stern, older woman who seemed to disapprove of our open-plan kitchen, and the bubbly college student who spent more time on her phone than making eye contact. I was starting to lose hope, thinking we'd have to settle for someone who was just good enough. And then Chloe walked in. It was like a scene from a movie. The world shifted from black and white to technicolor. She was 24, with a cascade of honey blonde hair and a smile that seemed to generate its own light. She wasn't just pretty. She radiated a kind of calm, effortless competence. She had a degree in early childhood education, a folder of glowing references, and a CPR certification. She sat on the floor and within 2 minutes had Liam showing her his favorite dinosaur and Sophie braiding a piece of her hair. She looked me directly in the eye when she spoke, her voice a soothing melody of confidence and warmth. "Your home is beautiful," she said, and it sounded like a genuine observation, not a cheap compliment. "I can see there's so much love here. I just want to help support that, to take some of the pressure off so you can enjoy it more." She was perfect, dangerously perfect. I remember feeling a wave of relief so profound it almost brought me to tears. She was the answer to a prayer I hadn't even realized I'd been whispering. "She's the one," Mark said, the moment the door closed behind her. His voice was filled with an unshakable certainty. "We have to hire her, honey. She's a godsend." I didn't hesitate. I called her an hour later and offered her the job. The first month was bliss. It was like our lives had been professionally organized and decluttered. Chloe was a silent force of efficiency. The kids adored her. The house was tidier. Dinner was often started by the time I walked in the door, the scent of roasting chicken replacing the smell of stale coffee and my own stress. She was intuitive, always anticipating a need before it arose. She'd pack the kids' swim bags the night before their lessons, remember that Liam hated the crusts on his sandwiches, and somehow managed to get Sophie to eat broccoli. I had time again. Time to focus on the big project at work. Time to have a glass of wine with Mark on the deck, to actually talk about our days instead of just exchanging logistical information like two air traffic controllers. I felt lighter. The constant, low-grade anxiety that had been my companion for years began to recede. I was a better mother, a more present wife, a more effective architect. And it was all because of Chloe. I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude towards her. She hadn't just taken a job. It felt like she had saved our family. I trusted her implicitly, in my home, with my children, with the perfect, fragile life I had built. She was the missing piece, the one that made the whole picture finally beautifully complete. That initial period of domestic tranquility, that golden month, was so intoxicating that I almost missed the subtle shift when it began. It wasn't a sudden jolt, but a slow, almost imperceptible change in the atmospheric pressure of our home. It started with the kind of details you notice but immediately dismiss, filing them away under overthinking or stress. You tell yourself you're imagining things because the alternative is too terrifying to contemplate. But these little details, these whispers of doubt, they don't just disappear. They collect like dust motes in a sunbeam, invisible until the light hits them just right, and then you see they've been there all along, coding everything. The first thing I noticed was Mark's schedule. He had always been a man of routine. Out the door by 7:30 a.m., home by 6:30 p.m., like clockwork. Suddenly, his routine became more flexible. He started coming home early, maybe 6 o'clock or 6:15. Chloe's shift ended at 6:30. Traffic was light, he'd say, dropping his briefcase with a cheerful thud. Wanted to catch the kids before bedtime. A wonderful sentiment, of course. What wife wouldn't want that? But it happened 2-3 times a week. He'd walk into the kitchen where Chloe was finishing up, and a conversation would spark. It wasn't just a polite, "How was your day?" It was laughter, shared jokes that seemed to die the moment I entered the room. I'd ask what was so funny, and the answer was always a vague, dismissive, "Oh, just something Liam did." I felt like I was walking into the middle of a movie, a scene where I didn't know the characters' backstories. Then came his sudden, intense interest in the minutiae of our children's lives, or rather, Chloe's management of them. It was no longer, "Did Sophie have a good day?" It became, "Did Chloe remember to pack Sophie's water bottle for ballet?" Or, "What time did Chloe say she was taking Liam to the library?" Her name was a constant presence in his mouth. He'd praise her for the smallest things. "Wow, Chloe really organized the playroom. She's incredible." Or, "Did you taste the spaghetti sauce? Chloe added a bit of basil. Smart." These weren't criticisms of me. They were framed as observations, but they felt like comparisons. He had never once noticed the state of the playroom when I was the one who spent a whole Saturday cleaning it. He had never commented on my spaghetti sauce. I felt a petty, ugly sting of resentment, and I hated myself for it. This woman was making our lives easier, and I was begrudging her a little praise. It was pathetic. I started watching them when they didn't know I was looking. It's a terrible habit, one that makes you feel like a spy in your own life. From my office window upstairs, I could see the backyard. I saw Mark, who was working from home that day, go outside to get some fresh air. He ended up standing by the sandbox where Chloe was playing with the kids. I couldn't hear their words, but I could see the body language. The easy lean against the playset, the way his head was tilted towards her, the broad, genuine smile on his face that was different from the smile he gave me. It was brighter, less complicated. I saw her laugh, a genuine, head-thrown-back laugh, and push a stray strand of blonde hair from her face. It was a perfectly innocent scene. A father, grateful for the young woman taking care of his children. That's what I told myself. But my stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. I tried to rationalize it all away. I was the one under immense pressure at work. I was tired, hormonal, probably jealous of Chloe's youth and the easy way she managed a household that so often felt like it was drowning me. Mark was just being friendly. He was a nice guy. It's one of the reasons I fell in love with him. He was probably just happy to have another adult to talk to during the day. It was all in my head. I repeated this mantra to myself over and over, hoping that if I said it enough, it would become true. But the evidence kept mounting, one tiny, insignificant piece at a time. The way he started wearing his good cologne on days he worked from home. The way Chloe would reference a TV show, and Mark would reply, "Oh yeah, I saw that one," when I knew for a fact we hadn't watched it together. One evening, I came home to find them in the kitchen, standing close together over her phone, looking at something and laughing quietly. The moment they heard my keys in the door, they sprang apart. Not a guilty leap, but a subtle, reflexive recalibration of distance. Chloe immediately busied herself wiping down an already pristine counter. Mark turned to me with a smile that felt just a little too wide, a little too bright. "Hey, babe, you're home," he said, kissing me. Felt like a performance. "What were you guys looking at?" I asked, trying to sound casual, breezy. "Oh, just a dumb video Chloe found of a cat playing a piano," he said with a chuckle. "Stupid, but you know." Chloe smiled sweetly at me. "It was very cute. Well, my time is up. Kids are all fed and happy. Have a wonderful night, both of you." And just like that, she was gone, leaving a faint scent of vanilla and a thick, unspoken tension in the air. Cat playing the piano. It was a perfect explanation. Plausible, forgettable. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that they weren't watching a cat video. The whispers were getting louder now, and they were starting to sound like a warning. For a week, I let the poison of suspicion circulate in my system. I replayed every scene, every lingering glance, every shared laugh, analyzing them until they lost all meaning and then somehow gained a more sinister one. The feeling was a physical presence, a cold weight in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I felt like a stranger in my own life, watching a play where everyone knew their lines except for me. Sleep offered no escape. My dreams were a tangled mess of closing doors and whispered conversations I couldn't quite hear. I knew I couldn't continue like this. The silence was becoming more corrosive than any potential truth. I had to talk to him. I had to give him the chance to make it all make sense, to extinguish this fire of doubt before it consumed everything I held dear. I chose a Thursday night. The kids were asleep, the house was quiet, and we were sharing a bottle of wine on the couch. A rare moment of peace I was about to shatter. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I took a sip of wine, the liquid courage doing little to calm the tremor in my hands. "Mark," I began, my voice softer than I intended. "Can I talk to you about something? It's probably nothing, but it's been on my mind." He turned to me, his face open and attentive, the picture of the loving husband. "Of course, babe. Anything. It's about Chloe," I said, forcing the words out. I feel like you two have gotten very friendly. And sometimes, I feel a little bit like an outsider when I come home." I laid out my observations as gently and non-accusingly as I could. The early arrivals from work, the inside jokes, the way he seemed to hang on her every word. I presented them not as evidence of a crime, but as a collection of confusing feelings. I ended by saying, "It's just making me feel a little insecure, I guess. I feel stupid even saying it." I was giving him an out, a chance to blame my feelings, not his actions. His reaction was instantaneous and devastatingly effective. First, a look of utter bewilderment, as if I had just started speaking in a foreign language. "Chloe?" he asked, a short, disbelieving laugh escaping his lips. "You're kidding, right?" He put his wine glass down and took both of my hands in his expression shifting to one of deep, paternal concern. "Oh, honey, no, is that what this has been about? You've been so quiet lately." And then it began, the gentle, methodical dismantling of my reality. "Babe, look at how much pressure you're under," he said, his voice a velvet blanket of reason. This project at work is killing you. You're barely sleeping. You're exhausted. Don't you think you might be, I don't know, seeing things that aren't there? He wasn't angry. He wasn't defensive. He was worried about me. He framed my suspicions as symptoms of my stress, my fatigue. It was brilliant. It made me the problem, but in the kindest way possible. I come home early because I miss you and the kids, he continued, stroking my hand with his thumb. I want to be here to help take the load off you. I talk to Chloe because she's here in our house for 8 hours a day. It would be weird and rude if I ignored her. I'm just trying to be a decent person, to make her feel comfortable. Every explanation was perfectly plausible. Every point he made chipped away at my conviction, replacing it with a creeping sense of shame. I was the ungrateful wife, the paranoid career woman, twisting her husband's kindness into something ugly. And honestly, he said, leaning in, his eyes searching mine, are you a little jealous? It's okay. I get it. She's young. She has this boundless energy with the kids. Maybe you feel like she's, I don't know, showing you up somehow? You shouldn't. You're their mom. You're my wife. You're everything. He was turning my own deepest insecurities against me, using them as the explanation for my concerns. It was like a magic trick. Now you see a valid suspicion. Now you see a neurotic, jealous woman. He saw the confusion and hurt on my face and pulled me into a hug. He held me tight, burying his face in my hair. You have nothing to worry about, he whispered. You and Liam and Sophie are my entire world, the only thing that matters. Don't you ever doubt that. I love you. I left that conversation feeling utterly lost. My brain was screaming that he was right, that I was being crazy and insecure. I had wronged him. I had wronged Chloe. A wave of guilt washed over me, so strong it made me feel sick. I wanted nothing more than to erase the last hour, to go back to being the blissfully ignorant woman who believed in her perfect life. But my gut felt different. It hadn't been soothed by his words, felt colder, tighter. His reassurances, as loving as they sounded, had felt like a cage snapping shut around me. He hadn't just denied my concerns, he had denied my reality. The next day, I made a concerted effort. I was cheerful. I was trusting. I smiled at Chloe and asked about her weekend. I kissed Mark with renewed affection. I was playing the part of the wife who believed her husband, hoping the feeling would follow the action. That evening, I was heading downstairs to grab a file I'd forgotten when I heard them talking in the living room. I stopped on the landing, hidden from view. She was just so tired and stressed. Mark was saying, his voice low and confiding, you know how she gets with these big projects. She's just not herself. I heard Chloe's soft reply, of course, you have to take good care of her. She's lucky to have you looking out for her like that. My blood ran cold. He was discussing my emotional state, a state he had largely manufactured with her. He was recruiting her, consciously or not, as an ally in my supposed breakdown. He was framing me as fragile, as unreliable, while positioning himself as the stable, caring husband. And she was validating him. In that moment, the last vestiges of my self-doubt burned away, replaced by a terrifying, icy certainty. I wasn't crazy. I was being managed, and I was utterly, completely alone in this. The moment I heard his words, discussing my supposed fragility with her, something inside me shifted. The hurt and confusion that had been churning in my stomach for weeks didn't disappear, but they cooled, hardening into something sharp and clear. Resolve. The feeling of being gaslit is profoundly disorienting. It's a form of psychological vertigo where you can no longer trust the ground beneath your own feet. But being confronted with the proof of that manipulation is, ironically, clarifying. It sets you back on solid ground. I finally understood that I wasn't in a partnership where communication had broken down. I was in a strategic game where my opponent was actively working to neutralize me by making me believe I was an unreliable narrator of my own life. My feelings were irrelevant. My intuition was a symptom. My words were just noise to be managed. If I wanted the truth, I wouldn't be able to ask for it. I would have to take it. The idea had been a dark whisper in the back of my mind for a while, but I had always dismissed it as something out of a trashy movie. A nanny cam. It felt like such a violation, a surrender to the very paranoia he accused me of. To secretly film your own family, your own home, it meant accepting that your sanctuary was no longer safe. It meant admitting that trust was well and truly dead. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the steady, oblivious breathing of the man beside me, the idea no longer seemed melodramatic. It seemed necessary. It was the only way to get a witness whose testimony couldn't be twisted, a pair of eyes that couldn't be accused of being tired or stressed or jealous. I wasn't just looking for proof of an affair anymore. I was looking for proof of my own sanity. The next day at work, I didn't open a single architectural draft. I descended into the rabbit hole of online surveillance equipment. My search history, viewed by an outsider, would have painted a disturbing picture. Undetectable spy cameras. Hidden cameras for home. Best covert nanny cams 2025. I scrolled through pages of teddy bears with glassy eyes and smoke detectors with tiny black lenses. They all felt too obvious. I needed something mundane, something that would blend so seamlessly into the background of our lives that it would be functionally invisible. After hours of research, I found them. A set of 3, all feeding to a single, password-protected app on my phone. The first was a simple black USB wall charger, the kind you see in every kitchen and office. The second was a sleek digital clock, almost identical to the one we already had on the living room mantel. The third, and this was the one that felt the most insidious, was a thick, decorative book, a faux leather-bound copy of Moby Dick, with a lens hidden in the spine. I would put it in the playroom. I used my personal credit card, the one Mark didn't see the statements for, and had the package delivered to my office. Each click of the mouse felt like a small, necessary betrayal. I was building an arsenal for a war I had never wanted to fight. The box arrived 2 days later, a plain brown package of devastating potential. I waited for the right window of opportunity. Came on a Tuesday. Mark had a lunch meeting that I knew would run long, and Chloe was taking the kids to a gymnastics class across town. The house was empty, silent. My heart pounded as I unpacked the devices. They felt ordinary, harmless in my hands, which somehow made it all worse. I started in the kitchen. With trembling fingers, I unplugged the charger where we all juiced up our phones and plugged in the new one. It looked identical. Next, the living room. I took our old digital clock off the mantel, dusted the spot beneath it, and set down its replacement. I adjusted the angle, making sure it had a clear, wide view of the main couch and the entrance to the hallway. Lastly, I went to the playroom. This one felt the worst. It was the kids' space, their world of innocence and imagination. Placing the book on the shelf next to the very hungry caterpillar felt like a profanation. I felt a surge of self-loathing so intense I had to sit down for a moment. Was I the villain in this story? The spying, suspicious wife? No. The villain was the person whose actions made all of this necessary. I steadied myself, connected the devices to my phone's app, and watched the 3 silent, empty scenes of my life flicker onto the small screen. My house was officially bugged. The first 2 days of watching were an exercise in psychological torture. Every few minutes, in the middle of a client call or a team meeting, I would retreat to the bathroom to check the live feeds. I saw nothing. I saw Chloe patiently helping Liam with a puzzle. I saw her dancing with Sophie to a song from a Disney movie. I saw her cleaning up spilled juice. It was a highlight reel of the perfect nanny. With every mundane, innocent scene, a voice in my head grew louder. He was right. You are crazy. You've done this for nothing. The shame was beginning to bubble up again, hot and acidic. I had violated their privacy, and for what? To confirm that I was the unstable one? I was about to give up, to delete the app and throw the devices in the trash, when I saw something. It was Wednesday afternoon. I had the kitchen feed open on my phone, propped up behind my monitor. Mark had come home early. He walked into the kitchen, where Chloe was washing strawberries at the sink. He went to the fridge, got a bottle of water, and walked towards the doorway behind her. It all looked perfectly normal. But as he passed her, his hand, the same hand that held mine in our family portrait, dropped to the small of her back. It wasn't a clumsy, accidental brush. It was a gesture of effortless intimacy. His fingers rested there for a beat, 1, 2, a silent, proprietary claim, before he continued on his way as if nothing had happened. Chloe didn't flinch. She didn't react at all. And that was the most damning part. Her lack of reaction meant it was normal. It was familiar. It was their language. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't a blatant act of infidelity. But it was everything. It was the truth. It was a secret, shared moment that I was never meant to see. The hope I had foolishly allowed to flicker was extinguished. And in its place, a cold, dark certainty settled in. I wasn't crazy. And this was only the beginning. That single, fleeting touch on her back fundamentally rewired my brain. The chaotic storm of emotion, the doubt, the fear, the shame, subsided, replaced by a chillingly clear sense of purpose. I was no longer a wife tormented by suspicion. I had been promoted to lead investigator in the forensic audit of my own marriage. I watched the camera feeds now not with a desperate hope of being proven wrong, but with the cold, methodical patience of a scientist observing a specimen. My home was a petri dish, and I was logging the behavior of the two organisms who were poisoning it from the inside. I started taking notes, screenshots, marking down times and dates. I was gathering data, building a case. My grief was still there, a vast, frozen ocean beneath the surface, but on top, I was all business. The data points accumulated quickly. The small intimacies were daily occurrences, a steady rhythm of betrayal humming just beneath the surface of our domestic life. I saw him bring her a cup of coffee in the morning, our special mugs, and their fingers would brush and linger for a fraction of a second too long. I saw him, while on a conference call in his home office, walk out to the living room just to stand behind the couch where she was reading to Sophie. His eyes not on his daughter, but on the curve of Chloe's neck. I watched them one afternoon, a rainy Thursday, share a bowl of popcorn and watch a TV show with the kids. When Liam and Sophie were engrossed, Mark reached over and plucked a piece of popcorn from the bowl, but instead of eating it, he gently tossed it into Chloe's mouth. She caught it, and they shared a silent, conspiratorial grin. It was the kind of playful, mindless intimacy that belongs only to lovers. Each incident was a small cut, another crack spiderwebbing across the perfect mirror of the life I thought I had. I knew, however, that these moments, while damning to me, were still open to his interpretation. He would call it friendliness, imagination, stress. I needed something unambiguous, something final. I needed the kill shot. The opportunity presented itself the following Friday. My in-laws had been planning to take the kids for an overnight stay for weeks, their first big sleepover. It was meant to be a date night for Mark and me. I had a major deadline, however, and had told him I'd be stuck at the office until at least 9 p.m. He was effusively disappointed but understanding. "No problem, babe," he'd said. "You do what you have to do. I'll just hold down the fort here." He had arranged for Chloe to stay late until 7 p.m., under the pretense of helping him do a deep clean and organization of the playroom now that the kids weren't there to get in the way. The perfect setup. The house would be empty except for them. That Friday, I didn't get a single piece of work done. I sat in my locked office, the plans for a multi-million-dollar library complex blurred and meaningless on my monitor. My real focus was the small screen of my phone, displaying the live feed from the digital clock on my living room mantle. For hours, it was nothing. I saw them moving in and out of the frame, carrying boxes of old toys. I heard the distant sound of their voices, too muffled for the camera's cheap microphone to pick up clearly, punctuated by occasional laughter. My anxiety was a live wire in my veins. Around 6:30, they came into the living room and collapsed on the couch, feigning exhaustion. Chloe kicked off her shoes and tucked her feet under her. Mark leaned back, running a hand through his hair. They sat there for a moment in a comfortable silence. It was the kind of silence you only share with someone you know intimately. Then he turned to her, and the whole energy shifted. The camera, silent and unseen, captured it all. He was talking, his expression serious, earnest. She was listening, her gaze fixed on his face. She nodded, and then reached out, placing her hand on his arm. It was a gesture of comfort, of reassurance. Then it happened. He stopped talking. He lifted his hand and slowly, so slowly, tucked a stray piece of her honey blonde hair behind her ear. It was the most tender gesture I had ever seen from him, and it wasn't for me. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut for just a second. The space between them evaporated. He leaned in and he kissed her. It wasn't a frantic, passionate kiss. It was worse. It was soft, familiar, and deeply confident. It was a kiss that had happened hundreds of times before. It spoke of shared history, of secrets, of a life lived in the shadows of my own. He held the kiss for a few seconds, his hand still cupping her face. My entire world, everything I had built, everything I believed, was incinerated in that single silent image. My body reacted before my mind could. A strangled gasp escaped my lips. The phone clattered from my numb fingers onto the desk. The air in my sterile, climate-controlled office suddenly felt thick and unbreathable. I stumbled out of my chair and made it to the small, private bathroom adjoining my office just as my stomach convulsed. And I threw up the coffee and ambition I'd consumed that day. I knelt on the cold tile floor, shaking, tears and saliva mingling on my chin. The reflection in the chrome faucet was of a stranger, a pale, horrified woman with hollow eyes. After a few minutes, my trembling hands managed to pick the phone back up. I navigated to the app, my thumb clumsy and useless. I found the recording. I rewound it, and I watched it again, and again, and again. I had to be sure. I had to burn the image into my memory, to cauterize the wound with the very flame that had inflicted it. There was no ambiguity, no room for explanation or interpretation. There, in pristine digital clarity, was the truth. The first crack in the mirror had just splintered into a million irreparable pieces, and I was staring at the wreckage. There is a strange, paradoxical clarity that comes after witnessing the absolute worst. The raw, violent shock of seeing that kiss gave way to a state of hypercalm. The emotional storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape of silent, frozen devastation. I was no longer a participant in my own life. I was an archaeologist sifting through its ruins. The goal was no longer to feel, but to know. Confronting him now would be a messy, emotional affair. He would lie, he would cry, he would twist the narrative. He would try to manage me just as he had before. Couldn't allow that. An emotional confrontation was a fight on his terms. I needed to fight on mine. And as an architect, my terms were structure, evidence, and irrefutable facts. The kiss was my cornerstone. But now I needed to see the entire blueprint of their betrayal. I needed to understand its scale, its duration, its cost. My first stop was our family phone plan. I logged into the account online, the password, a combination of our anniversary and Liam's birthday, feeling like a cruel joke. I navigated to the usage details for Mark's line and downloaded the last 6 months of itemized records. The PDF file that opened on my screen was a dense, sterile sea of numbers and dates, but I knew her number by heart now. I typed it into the search bar, and the document lit up like a Christmas tree. The sheer volume was staggering. It was a relentless, daily conversation. Dozens of texts every single day. They texted in the morning before she arrived, and they texted late into the night, long after I had fallen asleep beside him. I saw my own text to him in the log. "Can you pick up milk?" Or "Love you," punctuated by a flurry of messages between them. I was a brief interruption in their ongoing dialogue. I cross-referenced the call logs with my memory and my calendar. A 45-minute call on the Tuesday he was supposedly in a marathon meeting with his boss. A string of texts on the weekend we spent at my parents', when he had seemed so distant and distracted. It went back months, almost to the very beginning. This wasn't a recent mistake, a moment of weakness. This was the operating system of my marriage. He was living a double life and I was holding the schematics in my hands. The pain of it was different from seeing the kiss. The kiss was a hot, sharp betrayal. This was a cold, calculated deception. 1,000 tiny paper cuts of deceit that bled me dry without me ever knowing it. With the timeline of their communication established, I moved on to the money. I had always managed our finances. I was the organized one, the one who tracked our investments and paid our bills. The irony was a bitter pill. I logged into our joint credit card accounts, a grim sense of purpose settling over me. I wasn't looking for a single smoking gun, but a pattern. A financial narrative that didn't align with the life I thought we were living. It didn't take long to find it. I started with restaurants. Mark often claimed he worked through lunch, grabbing a sad desk salad. The statements told a different story. There were regular charges from La Petite Fleur, a romantic little French bistro on the other side of town, a place I'd once pointed out and said we should try. The charges were always for two, always on a weekday, always around 1 p.m. I could picture them there, sitting at a quiet corner table, his hand across the table covering hers. Then came the retail charges. A charge for $400 at a high-end lingerie boutique I had never set foot in. A purchase at a jewelry store in a neighboring town a few days before Chloe's birthday. I remembered that day. He told me he was getting his watch repaired. I thought back to the delicate gold necklace Chloe had started wearing, the one with the tiny, almost invisible charm. I had even complimented it once. "Oh, it was a gift," she'd said with that perfect, dazzling smile. Each discovery was a new layer of hell. He wasn't just sleeping with her. He was courting her. He was wining and dining her, buying her gifts with our money, building a new romance right under my nose. But the final, soul-crushing blow came when I scanned the hotel charges. There it was. A charge for $580 from the Mulberry Hotel, a chic, discreet boutique hotel known for its secluded ambience. The date was from a month prior, a Wednesday. I checked my calendar. He had called me that afternoon, his voice strained with fake exhaustion, telling me his team was in crisis mode and he'd have to pull an all-nighter at the office to get a project done before a deadline. I remembered feeling a surge of sympathy for him. I'd ordered his favorite takeout and left it in the fridge for him, with a little note telling him how proud I was of how hard he worked. I felt the vomit rise in my throat again, but I swallowed it down. I would not be sick again. I would not cry. I opened a new file on my computer, a spreadsheet. With the detached precision of an auditor, I began to log every single piece of evidence. I cross-referenced the phone calls with the credit card charges. The long call on a Tuesday was followed by the lunch at La Petite Fleur. The flurry of texts in early May coincided with the jewelry purchase. The hotel charge was preceded by a spike in late-night communication. I was mapping their entire affair, creating a timeline of lies, a ledger of betrayal. By the time the sun came up, I was done. Staring back at me from the glow of the laptop screen was the full, ugly, undeniable truth. It was a comprehensive, data-driven portrait of my husband's secret life. The emotional, broken woman from the night before was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize. A woman armed with a dossier of facts, a timeline of deceit, and a core of glacial, unbreakable rage. I finally had the full picture. The question was no longer what had happened, or if I was crazy. The only question left was how I was going to burn it all to the ground. For 2 days, I lived with the knowledge, carrying it like a block of ice in my chest. I went to work. I reviewed blueprints. I helped Liam with his math homework. I read Sophie a bedtime story. I moved through the motions of my life with a calm, terrifying detachment. Mark, oblivious, played his part as the loving husband, asking about my day, kissing my cheek as I cooked dinner. His every touch felt like a violation, every kind word an insult. I watched him, this man I had loved for a decade, and saw only a stranger, a very convincing actor. He had no idea he was living on borrowed time. He had no idea I was no longer his wife, but his judge, jury, and executioner. My strategy was simple. A structure cannot stand if you remove its foundations. Mark and Chloe had built their secret world together. They were a team. Confronting them together would be a mistake. They would defend each other, lie for each other, a united front of betrayal. Confronting him first would give him time to warn her, to coordinate their stories, to paint me as the villain. No, I had to isolate the weaker of the two. I had to dismantle their alliance before he even knew we were at war. I had to get to Chloe first. I sent her a text on Monday morning. Hi Chloe. Hope you're having a good day. Would you mind stopping by my office around 7:30 tonight after your shift? I'd like to discuss your end-of-year bonus and a potential schedule adjustment for next year. Thanks. The bait was perfectly crafted, professional, positive, irresistible. She replied almost immediately with a series of smiling emojis. Of course. That's so thoughtful of you. See you then. My office is on the 34th floor of a glass and steel tower downtown. At night, the city spreads out below like a carpet of glittering diamonds. It is my domain, a place where I am respected, powerful, and in absolute control. When Chloe arrived, punctual as always, the rest of the firm had gone home. The only sound was the quiet hum of the building's ventilation. She was glowing, her face bright with anticipation. She had worn a nicer blouse than usual. Hi, she said, her voice cheerful. Thanks so much for having me. This is such a cool office. Have a seat, Chloe, I said, my voice devoid of all warmth. I didn't smile. I gestured to the leather chair opposite my large, mahogany desk. The smile on her face faltered as she sat down, her posture stiffening. The power dynamic had shifted the moment she walked through the door. This wasn't a friendly chat in my kitchen. This was an interrogation. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, watching her. Then, I slid a single piece of paper across the polished surface of the desk. It was a printed copy of our credit card statement, a neat red circle drawn around the charge from the lingerie boutique. I'm reviewing our finances, I said, my voice level and calm, and I came across this charge. I don't remember this purchase. I was hoping you could shed some light on it. Confusion, then panic, flickered across her face. I don't know what that is, she stammered, her eyes wide. I've never seen that before. That's strange, I continued, my tone unchanging. I slid a second piece of paper across the desk, a printout of the phone records from that same day. Because according to this, you and Mark exchanged 57 text messages that afternoon. Must have been a very interesting conversation. Her face went pale. We were just talking about the kids. His car was making a funny noise. He was asking my advice. The lies were clumsy, desperate. His car? I repeated, a dead, flat sound. I see. I slid a third document towards her, a receipt from La Petite Fleur. He told me he ate a salad at his desk this day, but this is a charge for two. He must have a secret love for French food. Her composure was crumbling. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't know what you're implying, she whispered, her voice trembling. Mark has been nothing but a kind and respectful boss to me. You're making a mistake. A mistake, I echoed. I looked at her, this young woman who had slept in my children's home, who had eaten at my table, who had taken my husband. The last shred of empathy I might have had for her vanished. I picked up my phone from the desk, unlocked it, and tapped the screen. I placed it on the desk between us, angled towards her, and I played the video. There was no sound, just the silent, damning footage from the digital clock, the couch, the conversation, his hand tucking her hair behind her ear, the slow, familiar, soul-destroying kiss. A choked sob escaped Chloe's lips. She stared at the screen, her face a mask of horror and disbelief. The performance was over. The sweet, competent nanny persona shattered, revealing the scared, guilty girl underneath. She covered her face with her hands and began to cry in earnest, her shoulders shaking. I watched her, feeling nothing. No pity, no anger, just a vast, cold emptiness. I let the video play on a loop twice before I turned it off. There is no mistake, I said, my voice like ice. There is only the truth. And now you're going to listen to me very carefully. She looked up, her face streaked with tears and mascara. You will leave this office. You will go to our house, and you will pack one small bag with only your essential belongings. Our security guard will escort you. You will then go home. You will not contact my husband. You will not call him, you will not text him, you will not email him. You will not delete a single message from your phone. If you violate any of these instructions, this video, along with 6 months of financial statements and phone records, will be sent to your parents in Ohio and to the families who wrote your glowing references. Your career as a nanny will be over. Am I clear? She nodded numbly, unable to speak. Good, I said, standing up. The meeting was over. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you. Your services are no longer required. She stumbled out of the chair and practically fled my office. I stood by the window for a long time, watching the endless stream of headlights on the freeway below. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel victorious. I felt like I had just completed the first phase of a demolition. I had taken out a key support beam, and the structure was now critically unstable. All that was left was to push it over. I took out my phone and sent a text to Mark. We need to talk. Don't be late coming home tonight. I got home an hour before he was due. The house was cavernously silent, a vacuum where the sounds of family life used to be. Every room felt tainted, a stage for a secret play I had unknowingly been the backdrop for. I didn't turn on many lights, preferring the twilight that bled through the large picture windows. I went into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, my hand steady. The woman who had trembled while installing cameras weeks ago was gone. In her place was someone forged in the ice of betrayal. I walked into the living room, the heart of our home, and placed a single, thick manila folder on the center of the coffee table. Then, I sat in my favorite armchair, the one opposite the door, and I waited. Mark walked in at 7:15, looking tired from his day, a portrait of the dutiful husband returning to his sanctuary. Hey, babe, he said, dropping his keys in the ceramic bowl by the door. What's up? Your text sounded. He trailed off as he saw me, sitting in the dim light, my expression unreadable. He saw the folder on the table. The manufactured ease fell from his face, replaced by a flicker of genuine apprehension. He came towards me, leaning in for a kiss. I turned my head, and his lips met the cold air beside my cheek. That was the first shot. He straightened up, a confused, hurt look on his face. What's wrong? He asked. Did something happen at work? Sit down, Mark, I said. It wasn't a suggestion. My voice was a stranger's in my own home, low and even and hard as stone. He hesitated for a moment, then sank onto the couch, facing me. He kept glancing at the folder, a prosecutor's exhibit resting between us. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I let him stew in it, let his own guilty conscience begin the work for me. So, I began, my voice cutting through the quiet. I was looking at our hotel reward points today. Funny thing, I don't remember us ever taking a trip to the Mulberry Hotel. You must have gone without me. Tell me, how was your all-nighter there last month? The blood drained from his face. It was a direct hit, a fact so specific it bypassed all his usual defenses. But the habit of deceit is a strong one. He fell back on his training. The Mulberry? What are you talking about? I've never been there. Honey, you're not making any sense. Am I not? I leaned forward, my movements slow and deliberate. I opened the folder. My hand didn't shake as I pulled out the first piece of paper and slid it across the table. The credit card statement. The charge for $580, neatly highlighted in yellow. He stared at it, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish. That's a mistake, he finally stammered. A fraudulent charge. I was gonna call the credit card company. You were? I asked, my voice laced with a feigned curiosity that was sharper than any shout. That's odd, because I have here the phone records from that same night. I slid a second sheet of paper onto the table. You were on the phone with Chloe for 23 minutes at 11:47 p.m. That's a strange time to be discussing the children's schedule, isn't it? His eyes darted between the papers, then back to my face. The mask of the concerned husband was cracking, revealing the panicked liar underneath. She was having a crisis, he said, the lie flimsy and pathetic. Her landlord. I was just helping her. You know what she's like. Oh, I know what she's like, I said. And I know what you're like. You're the kind of man who buys the nanny a necklace from a little shop in Greenleaf Park. I added the jewelry store receipt to the growing pile. And lingerie. Let's not forget the lingerie. The receipt from the boutique joined the others. You did all this while telling me we needed to be careful with our spending this year. He was unraveling now, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. This is insane, he breathed, shaking his head. You've been spying on me? Going through my things? What is wrong with you? There it was, the last desperate gambit of the guilty man. Attack the person who caught him. I almost smiled. It was so predictable. What is wrong with me? I leaned back in my chair. That is an excellent question. Perhaps we should ask Chloe. I had a long talk with her tonight in my office. She was very cooperative. That was the blow that broke him. The knowledge that his accomplice had been compromised, his alibi eliminated. All the fight went out of him. What did she tell you? He whispered, his voice hoarse. Everything, I said, the word hanging in the air. She was quite honest, once she understood the alternative. He slumped, his head in his hands. It was a mistake, he mumbled into his palms. It just happened. It didn't mean anything, I swear. It was just a stupid, meaningless mistake. A mistake, I said, my voice dangerously soft. Buying her lunch at La Petite Fleur every week, is that a mistake? Texting her 100 times a day, is that a mistake? The hotel, the gifts, the lies. So many mistakes, Mark. You must be very clumsy. I stood up, took my phone from my pocket, and placed it on the pile of evidence in front of him. But you see, the problem with your story is that this doesn't look like a mistake. I pressed play. The silent video of the kiss filled the screen. The tender touch, the familiar intimacy, the confident, unhurried passion of two people who had done this 100 times before. He stared at the screen, and a sound came out of his throat, a guttural, wounded noise. The final, flimsy wall of his denial was obliterated. He was exposed, utterly and completely. He looked up at me, his eyes swimming with tears. This was a new look, not the manufactured concern of the gaslighter, but the genuine terror of the damned. Please, he begged, his voice breaking. Please don't. I love you. It was nothing. She was nothing. We can fix this. I'll do anything. Therapy. I'll quit my job. Anything. Please don't throw this away. He actually started to get off the couch, to kneel. I looked down at this weeping, broken man on my floor, and I felt nothing. The love had been burned out of me, replaced by the cold, hard truth of his actions. The man I married would never have done this, I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. He wouldn't have lied to my face every single day. He wouldn't have made me believe I was losing my mind. He wouldn't have conducted a secret life behind my back. I look at you now, and I don't know who you are. I paused, letting the finality of the words sink in. Get up, I commanded. Go upstairs. Pack a bag. I want you out of my house. He didn't argue. The fight was gone, extinguished by the undeniable truth on my phone screen. He just stared at me for a long moment, his face a hollow mask of shock and despair. Then he nodded, a single, jerky motion, and turned and walked upstairs. I stood motionless in the living room, listening to the sounds of him opening and closing drawers, the muffled scrape of a suitcase being pulled from the top of the closet. These were the ordinary sounds of a life being dismantled. 20 minutes later, he came down the stairs, carrying a single duffel bag. He didn't look at me as he walked to the door. His hand rested on the knob for a second. I love you, he whispered to the door, to the empty air, and then he was gone. The click of the deadbolt sliding into place was the loudest sound I had ever heard. And then silence. A silence so absolute, so profound, it had a physical weight to it. The adrenaline that had coursed through my veins for the last 48 hours vanished, and my bones suddenly felt as if they were made of lead. I sank back into my armchair, the fortress from which I had just won a war, and felt nothing but the vast, desolate emptiness of the victory. The pile of evidence was still on the coffee table, a sordid monument to a dead marriage. I walked through the house, room by room, a ghost in my own life. His coffee mug was still by the sink. His shoes were by the back door. The indentation from his head was still on his pillow. Everywhere I looked, I saw the ghost of the life we'd had, the life he had systematically poisoned. It was about 20 minutes before my phone lit up. It was him, a text message. "Please talk to me." I ignored it. A minute later, another. "I'm so sorry. I know I messed up." Then another. "Don't do this to our family." They started coming faster and faster. A frantic barrage of pleas, excuses, and accusations. "Chloe meant nothing. You were just so distant. You're destroying everything we built. What about Liam and Sophie? Are you really going to do this to them?" It was his last, pathetic attempt at gaslighting, trying to pin the destruction of our family on my reaction to his betrayal, not the betrayal itself. I turned my phone on silent and set it face down on the counter. The calls started immediately after, but the silent screen was easy to ignore. The next morning, I began the grim, logistical work of dismantling a life. My first call was not to my parents or my best friend, but to a 24-hour locksmith. As I watched the handyman efficiently drill out the old lock and install a new, unfamiliar set of tumblers, I felt the first flicker of something other than pain. Control. This was my house now, my sanctuary. He would not have a key. My second call was to the top-rated divorce attorney in the city. Her voice was calm, professional, and blessedly unsympathetic. She didn't offer platitudes. She offered strategy. We booked a consultation for the following day. My third act was to go online. With a few clicks, I opened a new bank account in my name only and transferred half of the money from our joint savings. It felt cold and transactional, but it was necessary. I was no longer a wife. I was a single mother who needed to protect her children's future. The children. The one part of this whole mess that felt like an open wound. They were still at my parents', blissfully unaware that their world had been fractured beyond repair. The thought of telling them, of seeing the confusion and pain in their eyes, was a physical agony. How do you explain this to a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old? Daddy isn't living with us anymore because he broke Mommy's heart. No, the truth was a burden for me to carry, not them. I called my mother, my voice cracking for the first time. I told her the sanitized version. "Mark and I are separating," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "He's moved out. Can you keep the kids for another day or two while I figure things out?" My mother, bless her, didn't press for details. She just said, "Of course, sweetheart. We're here for you, whatever you need." That night, after a day of lawyers and locksmiths, the emotional dam finally broke. I was in our master bathroom, clearing his things off the counter to make space for my own. His toothbrush, his shaving cream, his deodorant. And then I saw the bottle of cologne, the same one he'd worn on our first date. I picked it up, and without thinking, I sprayed a little into the air. The scent, once so comforting, so uniquely him, filled the room, and it was like a gut punch. It smelled of 1,000 happy memories, all of them now lies. It smelled of our wedding day, of the night Liam was born, of lazy Sunday mornings in bed. It was the scent of a man who didn't exist anymore, who had maybe never existed at all. I slid down the cool tile of the wall and finally wept. It wasn't the contained, quiet tears of the last few weeks. It was a raw, primal storm of grief. I cried for the husband I had lost, for the family I had failed to keep whole. I cried for my children, who would now be children of a broken home. And I cried for that smiling, naive woman in the photograph on the deck, the one who had believed in her perfect life, because she was gone forever. I was alone now, in the silent, echoing wreckage of our life. It's been 6 months since the night the door closed and the silence rushed in. The first few weeks after that raw, gut-wrenching breakdown were a blur of logistics and forced momentum. There were lawyers to meet, financial statements to untangle, and the impossibly difficult conversation with the children, who still asked when Daddy was coming home. I moved through it all in a fog of survival, fueled by coffee and a grim determination to simply get to the next day. The anger was a useful engine. the grief a constant, heavy blanket. But somewhere along the way, without me even noticing, the seasons changed. The blistering heat of summer, the season of my discovery and pain, gave way to the crisp, clear air of autumn. The leaves on the maple tree in our front yard turned a fiery red and then fell, blanketing the lawn. And I was still standing. The house is different now. It's quieter, but it's a peaceful quiet, not the echoing, empty silence of those first nights. The armchair he loved, the one that always seemed to hold the faint scent of his cologne, is gone. In its place is a tall, overflowing bookshelf filled with my books and the children's. I painted the living room a warm, creamy white, erasing the sterile gray we had once chosen together. I reclaimed the space, inch by painful inch, overlaying the bad memories with new, better ones. We have a new tradition now, the three of us. Friday is pizza and movie night. We pile onto the couch under a mountain of blankets, Liam and Sophie's warm little bodies pressed against mine, their laughter filling the room. In these moments, my life doesn't feel broken. Feels different, yes, but it also feels whole. Feels like ours. The divorce was finalized last month. It was an ugly, draining process. Mark, stripped of his charm and his secrets, was just a man, fighting desperately to hold onto a life he had already thrown away. He tried every tactic, pleading, threatening, attempting to use the kids as leverage. But I had my folder of evidence, my brilliant lawyer, and a spine made of steel I never knew I possessed. Our interactions are now confined to curt text messages about visitation schedules and shared expenses for the children. The man I share 2 children with is now just a name in my phone, a logistical problem to be managed. The love, the hate, the all-consuming rage. It's all gone, evaporated into a kind of weary, detached pragmatism. He is a chapter of my life that is now over. As for Chloe, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she moved back to Ohio a few months ago. Her name is like a ghost from another lifetime. I don't waste my energy hating her anymore. She was a symptom of a disease that was already in my marriage, not the cause. She was just a girl who made terrible choices, a lesson I had to learn in the most brutal way possible. Her story, whatever it is now, has no bearing on mine. The biggest change, I think, has been in me. The smiling, trusting woman in that perfect family photograph is a stranger to me now. I look at that picture and I want to warn her, to tell her to look closer, to listen to the whispers of doubt. But that woman is gone. The world broke her, but it forged the pieces into someone stronger. I am more cautious now. I am more cynical. I don't know if I will ever be able to offer someone the kind of blind, absolute trust one gave to Mark. But I am also more resilient than I ever thought possible. I have learned to be my own anchor. I have learned that I am capable of navigating the storm alone, and that the shore on the other side, while not the one I planned for, is solid ground. My happiness isn't the grand, technicolor feeling it once was. It's smaller, quieter, and infinitely more precious. It's the taste of my morning coffee in a silent kitchen before the kids wake up. It's the pride I feel when I nail a presentation at work. It's the feeling of Sophie's hand slipping into mine as we walk to the park. These are the small, authentic moments that are rebuilding my life, brick by brick. The future is no longer a shared dream, but a blank page. And for the first time in a long time, the thought of filling it in doesn't feel terrifying. It feels like freedom. It's a strange journey, walking through the wreckage of a life you thought was perfect. The path is littered with sharp edges, and there are days when the ghosts of what you lost feel more real than the ground beneath your feet. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that even after the most devastating fire, life finds a way to grow back. It may not be the same landscape as before, but there is beauty in the resilience, strength in the scars. The process of rebuilding is slow, and it's not linear. It's about finding the courage to lay one new brick, and then another, until you've built a shelter that is entirely your own, a place where you feel safe again. We all have stories of heartbreak and betrayal, moments that bring us to our knees. Sharing them, listening to them, reminds us that we aren't alone in our struggles. It reminds us that survival is possible, that there is a future beyond the pain, and that our stories are worth telling. If this story resonated with you, if you found a piece of your own journey in mine, consider giving it a like. And if you want to hear more stories of survival, resilience, and the complicated truths of the human heart, please subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening and for being a part of this community.